As always, tonight's shiur is Le'ilui Nishmat Avi Mori Dov Ber Brim Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael, and it's Lois Grossman's husband's yard site tonight, and his name is what his Hebrew name? Yeah, Lilu Nishar David Ben Menachem Munish also, and a refuah shlema to all of Chol Yam Yisrael, specifically to Chana Kayla Bat Sarah Leah, Liz Kruger, and we hope to our tefillot that our learning should be a merit for all of the people who are going through whatever they're going through, either en route from Ukraine or in Ukraine. So we hope that they should have a safe and fruitful movement forward. Okay, tonight we begin the third book of Torah, Vayikra, also known as Torah Kohanim, the laws pertaining to the Kohanim. And we really begin, of course, with the laws of Korbanot. You will see a lot of yellow highlighted on your screen. All of these words in yellow have the same root, kuf resh bet. Karov, which means closeness, to come close, to be close, to approach, to come near. And the word korban, which is often translated into English as sacrifice, Rav Hirsch, Samson Raphael Hirsch, is very much against that translation. And he explains very simply, I'm paraphrasing him. I was going to bring him to read, but I forgot to bring my Hirsch with me. But paraphrasing, he basically says that the word sacrifice implies that I, the person making the sacrifice, am doing it for the benefit of somebody else or some common good, perhaps. And in the case of Korbanot, that is clearly not the case. We are not offering a korban for anybody's good except our own good. And the purpose of a korban is not, as unfortunately many of the pagans believe, to appease God, to offer a gift to God, but it's really for us. It's we have done something that we would like to try to come close to Hashem, either voluntarily or in the case of where we have sinned. And therefore the root korban, coming, as I said, from the word karov, to come close to. And Rav Hirsch prefers, even though it's not the best, the word offering is what he usually uses, or at least, as I said, I don't know what he used. His English translator used that word. I don't know what he used in the original German. But the point he wants to make is that a korban is not a gift to Hashem. It's not something that we give because Hashem needs it. It's something that we need because we are trying to rectify or improve our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Having said that, as I said, you'll see highlighted throughout the word, all of the time, this root of karov appears in these parashot that deal with Korbanot. And I want to go back before that to begin with the introduction. You notice the first two psukim are the introduction to the laws of Korbanot. But it begins very interestingly with Vayikra, Moshe Adar, Hashem Elav Me'ol Moed Lemor. At the end of Parshat Pekudei, we found that the Mishkan was set up. It said that Moshe could not enter because of the Anan. And then it says Vayikra Moshe, that Moshe calls Hashem calls Moshe, Hashem calls Moshe, and then Vayidaber Elav Hashem Elav. The point the Parshanim want to make is that Hashem, to not startle Moshe, he calls him first gently, and then he begins to speak to him. And from here, we're supposed to, the Parshanim want us to learn etiquette, that you don't just yell at somebody and start talking to them. You should first gently call them and tell them you'd like to engage them in a conversation. Hence, the Vayikra El Moshe calls Moshe first, and then he begins to speak. And as we have seen in the parashot of the Mishkan, that the speech, if you will, the speech K'viyachol of HaKadosh Baruch Hu emanated Me'ohel Moed, and we have other psukim that tells me Bein Shnei HaKruvim, that Hashem's voice would emanate from the Kodesh Kodashim, and somehow Moshe heard it and nobody else heard it. But that's what happens when you're a Navi. You get to hear these things and the common folk don't. Now, the pasuk Korbanot, parshat Korbanot begins with the following two phrases: Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yamar toleim. Speak to bnei Yisrael. So, firstly, the audience of a lot of these laws are limited or restricted to bnei Yisrael, to the Jewish people, not to the goyim. Although we're going to find that there are some korbanot that goyim can bring, other korbanot would not be accepted from a non-Jewish person. And then it says Adam ki akriv mikem. If a person, Adam is even though we in many of the translators might say Adam a man, Adam as opposed to Ish generally means a Homo sapiens. Because if we go back to Bereshit, it's Zachar Nekeva Bara'am Laikrat Shmam Adam Biomi Bara'am. Adam is the generic name of the species rather than specifically the males, and therefore we have halachot pertaining to women bringing korbanot also. And we start with the law, and they said this is the general introduction. Tells us that we can bring korbanot from behemah, from animals, bakar and tzon, which are cattle and sheep, and then it goes and it gives us the law, different laws for each of those three. And we start with the korban olah. Korban olah literally means a korban that helps you, rises you up. The korban olah, which you see highlighted in green here in each of these three cases, which we're going to discuss, was offered entirely on the mizbeach, that there was nothing of it was eaten, as opposed to some of the other korbanot where portions were eaten either by the kohanim or by the owners or by both. In the case of the olah, none of the korban was eaten. It was all brought on the mizbeach. And we're going to see that as we go through the parshiot, that this is the law of the olah. There are, as I say, three different types. Now, it's interesting here in the beginning, we had bakar and tzon. We had two categories. When it gives down to the at Peirut, the details, it tells us there are three different kinds of korban olah. There is min ha-bakar in the far right, min ha-tzon, sheep in the middle, and min ha-of. You can bring animals from different types of birds, are also accepted. So there are three different types of korban olah that are brought from animals. First is bakar, cows, bulls. Okay, because the bull has to be, if we read, why isn't my mouse working here? It says when you bring from the bulls, it has to be zachar. Okay, has to be a male. Same thing with tzon, has to be a zachar. Same thing with the birds. Are all olot are male, not female. And we know it, interestingly enough, and this is a difference between the laws of the olah and other of the korbanot. The laws of the olah, as I said, we have three different groups, but some of the generic laws of olah are written in each of the chapters or in each of the first two. The third one does not really have any of the generic, because a bird offering is very different than an animal offering. Okay, so if we start with the animal that comes from the bulls, we have the following. It says, "V'samach yado rosh ha'olav and yirtzeh lechaper olav." One of the first requisite requirements after one brings the animal to the Mishkan, to the Kohen, is the owner has to rest his hands on the head of the olah. This is a requirement for every individual korban, even though it's only written here by korban olah and it's only written by parim. It's the only place that this law of samach yado is written. I take it back. It's written later on in others, but this is the only olah where it says samach yado, and yet it applies to both olot, both whether it's from the whether it's a bull or it's a ram or a lamb or a goat, as we're going to see later in a minute. Okay, the process after smicha, the vishachat, the animal is then slaughtered, not necessarily by a kohen. Anybody can do the shechita. If the person themselves want to do it, they have to know how to do shechita, they're welcome to do it. But this is the only part of the avodah that does not require a kohen, because we see right away it says vikrivu right after vishachat, after it's slaughtered, vikrivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim et hadam. The kohanim have to bring the blood from the animal, which is the primary purpose of bringing the animal, is sprinkling the dam on the mizbeach. The dam is taken by the kohanim, bizarku et hadam al mizbeach saviv. They are to literally zarku is to throw or to sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach all around. Asher petach hamoed, and it tells us which mizbeach, because remember in the Mishkan there are two mizbachot. There's the mizbach olah, which sits outside the main building in the courtyard area. There's mizbach hazahav, the golden altar, which is for ketoret, that sits on the inside. All korbanot, blood is sprinkled on the outside mizbeach, with the exception of certain chataot that are brought where the blood is brought inside. But most or virtually all korbanot are offered only on the outer mizbeach, not on the inner mizbeach. They do not enter the inside into the building part of the Mishkan. They are in the courtyard where the mizbeach is. After that, the blood is sprinkled, then the korban has to be skinned and cut up into pieces. And the pieces, now we have almost a parenthetical part. This is part of the mourning process. When the Kohanim first arrive, they have to make sure that there's fire on the mizbeach. They have to make sure there are logs on the mizbeach to burn the korbanot. And then after they have done that, which is normally before the bringing of the korban, then it's for they take the pieces of the korban and bring it onto the mizbeach. Again, those the wood that we just spoke about, that's on the mizbeach. And the inner parts, the intestines, are washed before they are put on the mizbeach. And the entire animal is then brought upon the mizbeach in the case of a korban olah. And then the pasuk ends with Ishei Reach Nichoach Lashem. It is for the fire. It is a Reach Nichoach to Hashem. Now, Reach Nichoach literally translates as a sweet-smelling, savory thing. Some people might like the smell of barbecuing meat. Others might not. But the point of Ishei Reach Nichoach Lashem, which we're going to see again, you'll notice it's a phrase I've highlighted because it appears throughout the Korbanot process, either Ishei Lashem or Ishei Reach Nichoach Lashem, is that Hashem is pleased the same way you would be pleased and enjoy something that smelled nice. So too Hashem is pleased when we bring korbanot according to the halakha, and because we're bringing them because we want to come close to Hashem. As I said, the purpose of the korbanot to come closer to Hashem, not for any other purpose. Okay, very similar process with the tzon, if it's from the sheep, but it's again, tzon really includes two types of. It doesn't include only what we call sheep, but it calls sheep or goats. Again, it has to be zachar, and again, it has to be tamim. As we're going to see with the korbanot, they all have to be tamim. They have to be not missing a limb or not have some other defect that would cause it that would invalidate it. There's a whole list if you want to go into the Gemara in the Zvachim and Gemara in Chulin that talk about all the different possible defects that can happen in an animal to invalidate it from being brought as a korban. Okay, then we have again another general pasuk that refers to olah, which from olah the Gemara learns out to lots of other korbanot. V'shachado to al yerach hamizbeach tzafona lifnei Hashem. The shchita that we talked about, even though before we talked about shchita, here also we have the shchita. But this is a general pasuk for all korbanot, even though it only appears in this context of the korban of tzon, is that the shchita of an olah has to be on the north side of the mizbeach. That's an area that's delineated as machloket, of course, in the Gemara, how far that area goes from east to west, from east to west, but it's north from the mizbeach till I guess it would be the northern wall of the Mishkan, of the Chatzer. How far, as I said, it extends on the other to east and west is a machloket, both in the Mishkan as well as in the Beit Hamikdash. And if you're somebody who says Ezel Makom every morning, you will know that all korbanot that are Kodshei Kodashim, which is Chatat, Asham, and Olah, all have to be slaughtered on the north side, based again on this pasuk and different limudim that apply this pasuk to all Kodashim, Kodshei Kodashim korbanot. And again, we have a very similar phraseology. It's cut up after the dam. Again, the blood is brought on the mizbeach. It's cut up into pieces and brought onto the mizbeach. And again, we have the same phrase. Again, we wash the inside has to be washed. And olahu, it's an olah kisherech nichoach Hashem. Again, that same phraseology. The third type of korban olah that's discussed is the olah of a bird. Imina of korbanot, olah korbanot Hashem. Two different types of birds, torim, generally translated as turtle doves. B'nai Yonah, generally translated as doves, but I think that B'nai Yonah might also be pigeons. Not really sure, but it's some kosher bird that you're allowed. Now the bird korban is very, very different. It's unique. There's a unique procedure. When the Kohen brings it on his back, umalak et rosha. The bird is not offered through shkita, even though when we eat our birds, yes, you eat birds, they're shechted. In the Beit HaMikdash, birds were not shechted. They were killed through the process of malika, which has to be performed by the Kohen, unlike the shkita of the animals, which can be performed by anybody. The malika of the bird offerings has to be done by the Kohen. Commentaries offer different reasons as to why malika instead of shkita. By the way, if you're interested, malika basically was you had to puncture the organs, the windpipe and the windpipe and the come on, think Aaron. English. Thank you. The esophagus with the thumbnail of the Kohen had to be done. In other words, he would hold I haven't yet figured out how they did it, but they would basically hold it, stretch the neck out between their two top fingers, and then they had to use the thumbnail to form the shkita, basically. This was, according to the Gemara, one of the more challenging jobs of the Kohen Gadol, of the Kohanim, which wouldn't surprise me. I think it was probably a little more challenging than taking a knife and shechting an animal. And the reason offered by many parshanim is because if you shechted it, the blood would gush out. You wouldn't be able to catch enough of it to pour on the mizbeach. The birds don't have, being that they're smaller than animals, don't have as much blood you want to get on the mizbeach. So therefore, the malika is done in there, and it's done at the mizbeach as opposed to on the side of the mizbeach. No, Kohen Asmak, you notice I did it with my left hand. For those who are sitting here, those who are on Zoom can't tell. I did the procedure with my left hand. I would not be a good Kohen because I have to be left-handed. Kohanim have to be right-handed, have to do all the avodah with the right hand. If you're a left-handed Kohen, you are going to have a lot of challenges when the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt because you're going to have to learn how to use your right hand and your right leg, by the way, for certain things. Cannot be the only thing that is done with the left hand is when the Kohen Gadol had to use both hands on Yom Kippur to bring all the things he had to bring into the Kodesh Kodashim in with him. He used his left hand also, but other than that, you were not allowed to use your left hand. Okay. And then again, now the bird offering is offered differently. Certain parts of it, the crop is removed, is thrown near the mizbeach and not put on the mizbeach. But the rest, I know certain parts of the bird are removed. I believe it's the zefek and the korkavan, and which basically means the parts where the food is, because birds being scavengers, they're not supposed to be offering their, quote, stolen food on the mizbeach. So you had to remove the parts where they might have food stored, and then you bring the rest of the bird is brought on the mizbeach. Again, same phraseology, Olahu Yisherech Nifoach Lashem. And as I said, this is the whole purpose of each of these korbanot is to help us come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So one of the things about the Korban Olah, when we first learn about the Korban Olah, it says Im Olah. If we go all the way back to the beginning, it says Im Olah. It seems to imply that if you want to bring a Korban Olah, you can bring a Korban Olah. And if you you can bring an Olah as a neder or a nadava. You can certainly bring a voluntary Olah. And yet there are the Parshanim want to tell us based on the Gemara that Olah is brought when you feel that you have had inappropriate thoughts in some sense of the word that have caused you to distance yourself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You thought about doing an Avera, or did something that didn't involve any action, and that's when you would bring a korban olah to as a kapara. Again, the purpose, as I said, of the korbanot is to bring you a step closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to try to repair a distancing that you've had because of something you may have done. That's the purpose of the korban olah. The pasukim, the parsha then digresses now from olah and goes to korban mincha. And interesting enough, we started with Adam. Where up above we said it was Adam that brings a korban. By the way, based on that, the Gemara says that one of the reasons it uses the term Adam, going back as I said with the bird in terms of something stolen, that a person should not be bringing a korban from something that does not belong to him. Just like Adam Harishon, everything belonged to him. If he wanted to bring a korban, it belonged to him. He wasn't stealing it from somebody else. So too, when we bring a korban, it should be something that is been earned honestly and honestly belongs to us, rather than something that does not belong to us. Okay. We get to the parsha of mincha, a meal offering, flour. And interestingly enough, the parsha begins not with the Adam ki takriv, but the nefesh ki takriv, korban mincha Hashem. Again, the mincha, based on monetary value, was brought by those who couldn't afford a bird or an animal. And if you think about it, we're going down from somebody who's wealthy enough to afford a cow or a bull, to somebody who can only afford a lamb or a goat, to somebody who can only afford a bird, to somebody who can only afford a little bit of flour. None of them, and the parasha wants us to understand that nobody is told that you can't come and bring an offering to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no matter how poor you may be, no matter what your financial status. If you truly want to give, you're allowed to give. And this is why Parshanim tells the word, this is the nefesh, because a person who is poor and brings a korban mincha probably is giving a larger percentage of his financial wherewithal than the guy who brings the cow or the lamb or the goat or the birds. Because yes, there is a stated amount. The stated amount is an isaron of solet, even though it's not listed in, it's not directly listed here, but it's the amount that you give is minimum amount is 1 isaron, which is 1/10 of an ephah, which is the minimum amount that you use to the chef. It's about 1.5 kilos is what they tell me in terms of modern measurements of flour, and that's the minimum amount that you give challah from. If you somebody who bakes challah, you would know how much it is, or should know how much it is. So v'nefesh ki takrif korban mincha Hashem. When a soul will bring a korban mincha, soul et yeh korbanot. The korban is basically flour. That's it. Now again, here we have some general statements about flour, although these first 3 psukim is also talking about a korban that is plain flour. It also has oil, olive oil, and it has frankincense put on it. 1 koret. I don't know how much a koret is, but it's basically one drop of frankincense is put on it. Heavy oil, he has to bring it again to the kohanim. And again, all from the time he brings it to Kohanim, there's no shlita, obviously, in a korban mincha, so everything has to be done by the Kohen. The kamatz misham lo kumtso. Second challenging avoda for the Kohen is taking a kamitzah. A kamitzah is a handful, but it's taken by basically taking your three middle fingers, digging into it, and then leveling it off with your pinky. And covering it, I guess, with the thumb to keep it from falling out is the way it was done. And that was the amount, even though he was an entire Isaron was brought, that amount that he gathered in his fist or in his palm of his hand that he was able to close his fingers around, that is the part that is brought on the Mizbeach, together with the oil and the levona. Together with the oil that he grabs in his hand and all of the levona, which is put on top of the solet. And he brings this is called the azkara. This is the remembrance part of the korban that is brought on the mizbeach. Again, same phraseology. Just as he's poor, he doesn't get any less of a recognition from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is again the same level, same exact words that we had with the animal korbanot, that he is recognized by Kadosh Baruch Hu as bringing a reach nichoach. Is it embarrassing? Again, the original rich man, poor man. There are people understand it. In theory, there is Beit HaMikdash wasn't the place that people stood around and hung out. No, you generally came because you were bringing a korban, or if it was a chag, or it was a special day that you were coming to bring something. Generally, you were coming to bring something, unless you were. I guess you theoretically could be somebody who came and you didn't participate. You came and watched. Again, if you were a Levi, you were singing. If you were a Yisrael, let's go back. Got to go back for 1 second because that's a very loaded question. Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim were divided into 24 groups. Okay, there were 24 mishmarot of Kohanim, 24 mishmarot of Leviim, 24 mishmarot or Mamadot of Yisraelim. And people were divided because not all the Jews came to Beit HaMikdash every day of the year. You came basically twice a year. There was a week, you were on 1 week and off 23 weeks, even if you were a Kohen. Now, as a Kohen, as a Levi, as a Yisrael, you could come when it, quote, wasn't your week. You were allowed to come to Beit HaMikdash, but you didn't, even a Kohen who came when it wasn't his week, wasn't necessarily given any privileges unless they happened to be short Kohen in that week. He was probably, just an ordinary onlooker. He was not given, unless he's either the Kohen Gadol or one of the officiating Kohanim. Kohanim who just showed up when it wasn't their week, were just like anybody else who showed up when it wasn't their week. It wasn't your week. You got to watch and stay on the sidelines. If we need you, maybe we'll call you, but probably didn't happen too frequently. Although I don't know. There's no. Yeah. Okay. If I take back, the exception is yes. I didn't catch your first name. As Esther mentioned, there is an exception. The Kohen who brings his own korban or even his wife's korban, according to some opinions, is allowed to officiate at that korban even if it's not his week. And they can't tell him he can't. But other than that, as I said, he's just an ordinary bystander. Okay. Okay, so let's get back to where we were. We were talking about now. The rest of the mincha was Laron Lanav Kodesh Kadashim Yeshei Hashem. The remainder, which is called the shiraim of the mincha, once the mincha was properly offered, in other words, that means everything about it was done correctly, the Kohanim could eat the rest of the flour that was left over that hadn't been taken in that handful. They could eat it. There were requirements. They had to eat it basically in the precincts of the Beit HaMikdash, and obviously with a tahara, and they could eat it basically that day. If it was a korban, if it was a standard mincha, could be eaten that day until night. Until I say take it back till midnight. Technically, there's one opinion says it could be eaten the next till daybreak the next day. However, you can do anything you want with the flour. Once the korban has been offered, this flour was the Kohen's food that was given to the Kohen with the condition that it had to be eaten b'tahara and in the Beit HaMikdash that day. So yeah, they can do anything they want. They can bake it, cook it, whatever. With one exception, we're going to see in 1 minute. There's an exception. No, first and foremost, by the way, even though it says he brings flour, when he took the kmitzah, it was not from flour. It was from the baked bread. Okay, in other words, the bread was baked into loaves, which we're going to see now in the detail. This was, as I said, this is the general korban mincha. We now get into the detail about different kinds of mincha. Come on, mouse. Let's go. Okay, the chitak riv. We have 3 different types of mincha. There is korban mincha ma'afei tanur. One is baked in an oven. One is al machavat on I forget which is which. I think machavat is the deep frying pan and marcheshet is the shallow frying pan. No, I take it back. It's the other one. This machavat is the shallow frying pan. I don't know. I always forget this. I think marcheshet is the deep fryer. Anyway, there were 2 different pans that it was brought in. It was either made on top of the oven by being, I guess we would call it fried, or inside an oven being baked into chalot. You say, can you eat it? You can eat it any way you want, with one exception, which we're going to get to right here. Verse 10. That little piece that was left over from the mincha is la'aron ulvanav. Aaron and his sons are allowed to eat it. Kodesh kadashim. But it says, kol hamincha, any mincha shetakriv l'Hashem that is being brought on the mizbeach, lo teyaseh chametz. Had to remain unchametz. They couldn't let it rise. Had to be baked, prepared in a way that it stayed as what we call matzah. Now, that doesn't mean it looked like an Ashkenazi flat, crunchy matzah. It probably looked a lot more like a Sephardi lafa matzah or a Temani lafa matzah, I would suspect. But it was not allowed to rise to become chametz. Both the mincha that was brought, as well as the noteret, the part that was left over for the kohanim to eat, could not be made into chametz. Had to be baked or fried as matzah and prepared as matzah. And similarly, they could not add any honey to it. Kol dvash is also, it's not allowed to be added honey, because again, honey, similar to shiur, leavening, yeast, etc., is not allowed to be brought on the mizbech, and they were not allowed to cause it to puff up. Again, the Farshim want to tell us that the purpose of the mincha is simple, just like matzah is simple. It's not supposed to be artificially blown up to look bigger than it is. Hence, it's not allowed to be fermented. Dvash would also enhance it by making it something sweeter than it is. Not allowed on the mizbeach. Okay. Let's one more thing. Okay, karban reshit. Now we get after this. We are told about two other different types of korbanot, things that help us come close to Hashem that are not brought on. That one is not brought on the mizbeach. That is karban reshit. That is when we have our first fruits, we takrivo tam Hashem. We bring them close to Hashem by bringing them to the Beit Hamikdash, as we read in parshat. We read in Reshit Bikurei Admatcha Tavi Beit Hashem Elokecha, both in Mishpatim and Kitisa, and then we read about the whole procedure when you brought your Bikurim in parshat Kitavo. That is what is referred to here as karban reshit. These are brought to Hashem, but Bela Mizbeach Lo Yalu L'Reach Nichoach. They are not brought on the Mizbeach. They are basically given to the Kohen, and the Kohen is allowed to eat them. But because it's called a Korban Reshit, the Kohen has to eat them basically in the precincts of the Beit HaMikdash, if I'm not mistaken, or I'm not sure if maybe it's the same as Maser, and it's, I've got to remember which Pasuk, Maser, maybe it's the same, it has been within Yerushalayim, I gotta have to check that one up, I don't remember. Bikurim, whether it's Reshit, it's compared to Truma and has to be eaten, Vitara also, okay. And then the other law that applies to all Korbanot, even though it's written in the context of the Korban Mincha, salt has to be added to every korban that is brought on the mizbeach. We have to have a sprinkling of salt. Lo tashbit melach brit elokecha me'al minchatecha. Even though, as I said, in the initial part of the verse, it seems to apply only to korban mincha, only korbanot of flour. But then the pasuk adds, al kol korban chatakriv melach. On every korban that we bring, there must be melach. Salt has to be brought. Parshanim tell us this is all part of Hashem's brit with the water, because salt comes from the ocean, and the water didn't want to be far away from Hashem. So Hashem said not to worry, they'll need salt from you to be brought on the Korbanot. Nice midrash about why we bring salt. But if we look at it, basically the salt is interesting because it's referred not to just melach, it's melach berit elokecha, the salt of the covenant with Hashem. So apparently melach is a symbol of some brit that Hashem created either with the Jewish people, with humanity. Salt, if we go back to the time of the Torah, salt's primary use was as a preservative. So salt being a symbol for the preservation of a brit seems to be very, very positively symbolic that on every korban we bring some salt. Okay. The other korban that is talked about here in the context of mincha is the korban that's called minchat bikurim, and this is interesting because it's introduced with the word v'im takriv. Im is ordinarily translated as if you will bring. However, the Talmud tells us there are three places where im refers to a commandment, not if but when, and this is one of them. That we have an obligation to bring minchat bikurim, otherwise known to us as the minchat haomer, the korban that is brought on the second day of Pesach. And this parsha, these two psukim here, or three psukim here, are talking about the korban of the omer, and it's told us how it has to be prepared. It has to be as aviv, meaning it has to be brought from the first spring crop. It's kalui, it has to be roasted, kalui ba'esh, roasted on fire. Geras carmel, it's whole stalks. Carmel ripened, fresh ripened. Takriv et minchat bikurecha, we have to bring this mincha. And it also has shemen and lavona, and it's a mincha like any other mincha. This one is brought on the mizbeach, as we see in parshat Emor, the whole bringing of the Korban Omer, and all of the Korbanot that were brought in conjunction with that, all the animals that were brought in conjunction with that. And again, it's brought both part of the Korban is brought on the Mizbeach, just like any other mincha. And with this, we conclude the first set of laws of mincha. The parsha then goes to the laws of zevach shlamim. And again, we have three different flavors of zevach shlamim, three different types. One is again min habakar. The other is a minatzon from a kesef, a lamb. The other is a goat. And again, we have very similar phraseology in terms of a lot of the things back to an olah. The difference with the zevach shlamim, as we don't see really here, but we see it later in Parshat Tzav, where it discusses the zevach shlamim, is that the shlamim, a zevach firstly means an offering of shlamim, meaning complete or peace offering. It depends on which translation you read, but the word shalom, are related words. The shlamim, a portion of it is brought on the mizbeach, a portion is eaten by the kohanim, and a portion is given to the owner to eat. Again, the shlamim is the korban that has the longest duration to eat it. You're allowed not just the same day until midnight, but you're allowed that day till midnight and the next day following up till sunset to eat the zevach shlamim. Reason being that you, the individual owner, had a rather large portion of the animal, and rather than it getting used for waste, the Torah gives us another day to eat it. One of the things we have to understand is that in terms of the korbanot and their duration of eating, we also understand they didn't have refrigeration back then. There was no that the korban, okay, we'll put it in the freezer and leave it for next chag or whatever. The korbanot were eaten in a timely fashion. As I said, with most korbanot, that were eaten the same day. The exception being the zevach shlamim, and later we see, of course, the bechor and the maser, which are eaten for the same time period as the zevach shlamim. No. There are different parts that go to each piece. The Kohen, I think, probably got the smallest portion. The base back got probably the second, and the owner probably got the largest. Again, depending on the animal. But I think that's the way I always perceived it. Then again, I don't know. Not being a shochet or having worked in a butcher shop, I really couldn't tell you exactly to the kilo how much each of the portions were of the animal. Yeah, different. It wasn't that we took a third. There were specific portions that were given to each of the constituencies, I guess. Excuse me. Okay. As I said, the difference here is that we have with this is, again, as I said, we agree. Most of the parts that are brought on the mizbeach is basically the chalev, the fats. The inner fats are brought on the mizbeach, as well as some of the internal organs. And again, we have only once here. Only at the first one is to say the full Ishay Reach Nichoach Lashem. The other two both just say Ishel Hashem at the end, right here. Ishel Hashem in the end of the tzon, and Ishel Hashem. Ishel Reach Nichoach Lashem here is, but it's interrupted by Kol Chaleb. So again, we have the same concept of the Korban Shlamim. Also, purpose is to bring you closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this one, as I said, is not just to bring you closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's supposed to help you improve your relationships with the Kohanim too, because they're getting a portion, you're getting a portion, everybody is in a joyous mood. Shlamim are generally brought, there are two different types of shlamim. We'll see only in next week's Parshat of Tzav that there's a shlamim that is called a regular shlamim, and there's a shlamim that's called a todah, which is basically a shlamim that is brought for a specific thank Hashem for a specific reason, and it requires not just the animal but lots of different flour or meal matzah offerings, flour, bread, whatever that is brought with it and also eaten and consumed. The difference being, by the way, and this is actually not until next week's parsha, is that the korban todah could only be eaten that day, just like other korbanot could not be eaten the second day. And most of the parshanim tell us the reason for that is so that you couldn't eat it alone. You had to share it with everybody. You had to invite all your friends to join you, or invite all the poor people in Yerushalayim who happen to be hanging around who desperately needed food. That was what you did with a Korban Todah. When you want to say thank you to Hashem, you said thank you by sharing with everybody, because you couldn't possibly consume the whole animal yourself in that one day. So then the parsha ends one final thought about all Korbanot. This section on the Shlamim ends with Kol chelev v'chol dam lo tochelu. We're not allowed to eat any of the chelev, any of the fats that were destined for the Mizbeach, which is pretty much the same in, what happened? Oh, great. Just signed me out of Zoom. Did I just lose Zoom? Did I just get signed out of Zoom? Hold on a minute. I gotta, excuse me, pardon me for one moment. Make a phone call. There's only one person who can kick me out of Zoom. She answers her phone.
We see you and we hear you.
Oh, you do hear me? Oh,
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
Oh, you can still hear me?
I still
Okay.
hear you and I still see you.
Oh,
And your
okay.
lips are still moving.
Is everybody on the Zoom still there?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I apologize.
No problem.
Did you just try to get into Zoom? Did you just log into Zoom? No? Oh, okay. All right. Thanks. Bye. All right. So it must have been I must have had a disrupt in my, hold on a second. You can still hear me?
Yes.
That's weird.
Yes.
Okay. So I am still logged in. Okay. Hold on. Let me go back now. Wait. All right. Let me go back to my screen sharing is paused. Let me go back. So I lost my screen. That's the problem. What happened here? All right. Let's go back. All right. So you can see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. I don't know what happened. It must have been a blip in the internet connection. Okay. Okay. Now I'm confused. Okay. So we're up to the last pasuk of Chelev Chol Dam, that we're not allowed to eat any of the fat that is to go on the Mizbeach, any of the dam that is eligible to go on the Mizbeach. We're also not allowed to eat, which is why we have a lot of the halachot of how we kasher our meat in general. But clearly in the law, in terms of Korbanot, the Chelev represented our willingness to give up something, to give to come closer to, again, restore our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And dam, we see later on that dam represents the lifeblood. And in reality, the whole purpose of the Korban is that the giver is supposed to view himself as if it's their blood, it's their fat being offered. That really, if I really wanted to come close to Hashem, I really have to give up my life in order to be able to come close to Hashem. And that's the purpose of the Korbanot. The rest of the parsha, which I'm not going to get into because our time is running out, deals with Korbanot that are offered on chet chataim, either because of sins of transgression rather than sins of commission rather than sins of omission, and Korban, all of the different types, or some of the different types of Korbanot Asham, which again are offered because of either a doubt or because of something we have done that has distanced ourselves from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in terms of commission, of committing something that we should not have done, and we are trying to now return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the whole parsha of Korbanot really is one that we are very distant from, I think, because we are far removed from the whole concept of Korbanot, the whole concept of the Beit HaMikdash. And yet, if we study the halachot of Korbanot and we look into the procedure, we have to understand that there are things that we can do. We have a pasuk in the Navi that tells us that we should use our lips in place of the Korbanot at a time when we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. And we have to realize that in order for the Korban to have any meaning, it had to be something that the giver was involved in by the smicha, which we started with, where he rests his hands on the animal, he watches the whole procedure going on in the animal. And the Kohanim, the purpose of the Kohanim officiating is to make sure that the person understands why they're going through the process as they're going through the process, whether it's the dam, sprinkling the dam, collecting the dam, bringing the emurim on the Mizbeach. All of these are supposed to be educational in nature, and internalized in nature. The giver has to internalize why they're doing it. And I think the same thing applies if we think about it to tefillah. If you want tefillah to transform you, tefillah is not going to transform God. Korbanot are not going to transform God because God doesn't change. They're to transform us and to cause us to think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how have we distanced ourselves from Hashem, and how can we come back closer to Hashem individually and as a people. And I think that's the whole lesson, or the overarching lesson of the Korbanot, and studying the laws of Korbanot. The more we study, the more we understand them, the more we realize why, unfortunately, there were periods of time in history where the Jews did not understand that, or the Kohanim themselves did not understand that, and that led to great national calamities. And if we want to undo those tragic national calamities and rebuild our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it has to be ki yakriv, a korban, that we have to want to try to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when we try to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu sincerely, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will hear our tefillot and will accept our korbanot, and we will be zelchet to Gula Shlem He'er V'Yameinu. Thank you all for joining. I apologize for the, everybody is still here. Look at that. I thought, okay. Thank you all. Have a good week. Any questions, comments, feedback at this point in time? The floor is open.
Yes, please.
Wait, David, 1 second. Lois has a question. Go ahead. The goal, the job of the Kohen is to engage the person bringing the korban. Now you have to understand, the person bringing the korban probably was told by his local, I don't know, rabbi, Kohen, who has his local religious authority, go to the Beit HaMikdash and go to this station at the outside the Beit HaMikdash, and they'll tell you what to do. So the first thing you did was you went to the Kohen who was in charge of selling the animals, unless you were bringing your own animal. Okay, not everybody came with a korban, had an animal in their back pocket. They came with money, and they went up to the Emda where it said, okay, you come here for an olah, you come here for a chatat. The Kohen there would have to first find out, why are you coming to bring a korban? What korban is suitable for you? Do you need a bird? Do you need an animal? Do you need some flour? Do you need all of the above? Do you need some of the above? What is the purpose you're coming to bring a korban for? Did you go to the mikveh this morning? You know, important things like have you been in contact with a dead body in the last 7 days and haven't been sprinkled with the dam of with the water from the parah adumah? So there are all sorts of questions that the Kohanim had to go through before you could even start the process of bringing your korban. That, at least that's what's supposed to happen, okay? If we think about the whole procedure, not everybody understands. People who lived outside of Yerushalayim and maybe came to Yerushalayim maybe once, maybe 3 times a year, didn't necessarily know what the whole procedure was. How many times in your life, did you have, let's say, for example, when we have Birkat HaChama, which happens once every 28 years. How many people remember what happened? Oh, I remember 20 years ago. That's exactly how we did it. No problems. No, you don't remember. Even when Pesach comes on Motzei Shabbat, which happens more frequently than every 28 years, we don't remember what we did last Pesach when Seder night was Motzei Shabbat. We don't remember. We forget these things. So certainly people who were not living or coming regularly to Yerushalayim, they really didn't know per se what the procedure was. They would come, and that was the job of the Kohanim. The Kohanim were supposed to be the resident experts in terms of making sure you knew what you were doing. Now, I suspect that if the Kohanim only came twice a year, they probably also weren't always on top of their game. And they probably had to review also what they're doing. And that may, again, explain part of the failures of the whole procedure of the Beit HaMikdash. They may have been very good at bringing the Karban Tamid and the communal offerings because that was a regular basis. They did it. But, individuals coming, maybe they weren't as good, or maybe the Kohanim themselves. I don't know. But it seems if you look through, especially the Nevi'im, especially Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, not as much Yechezkel, but Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu, as well as most of Trei Asar, you will find that the Korbanot were not accepted by Kadosh Baruch Hu because they weren't being offered in the proper framework, spirit. There's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu says, Hashem says, I didn't want these were not the Korbanot I was asking you to bring. He says it very clearly. And it's obvious that there were times in Jewish history where even though the Beit HaMikdash was up and operating, it wasn't necessarily operating the way it was supposed to be operating. And that's why Shem decided it was time for it to close business. And I think that's one of the things we have to really take to heart when we study the laws of Korbanot. David Salter, you had a comment?
So two quick questions. You said the Kohanim had to be right-handed.
Yes.
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 What do we learn? That seems a bit odd to me. What do we actually learn from that? And secondly, the way you described the system, there seems to be a parallel in Christians going to confession and confessing to their the Kohanim.
Okay. All right. Let's start with the first question first. The first question was a Kohen is right-handed. Why right-handed? The Torah says so. Why the Torah says so? I would suspect because as politically incorrect as this is, right always represents strength. Left always represents weakness. That's just the way it is. And this is, for me, I'm a lefty, by the way, for all those who are interested. It's the reality of the way the Torah speaks, right and left. Right is always strength. Left is always not as strong. Regarding the second question, confession is when again, we didn't get into the Korbanot Chatat and Asham, but the vidui that we recite on Yom Kippur, or that a person had to recite when he brought a Korban Chatat or a Korban Asham, is very, very much like the Christian confessional. Where do you think they got it from? Again, the key to changing yourself, and that's what the whole procedure of Korbanot is. It's to have an impact on you, the bringer. And you can't have an impact on yourself if you're not willing to accept the fact that you're not perfect. That's confession. You guys say, I screwed up and I can do better. And that's not an easy thing to say for anybody, for everybody. And yet it's a critical component, whether it's a regular Monday, a regular Tuesday, a regular Wednesday, or Yom Kippur. This is a critical component to growth, is realizing that, yes, we can grow, we can change, there's room to grow, and that we're not perfect. So vidui is a critical component of bringing korban, especially as I said, in terms of chatat and asham, and to a lesser degree olah. But it's a requirement, and it certainly is a requirement. If we want to have our tefillot accepted, that we have to be thinking about how we can improve ourselves. Certainly, that's a critical component of certainly the Yomim Noraim tefillah, if not the tefillah all year long. Okay? Any other questions, comments? Okay, if not, everybody have a wonderful week. And Ezra Hashem will be back next week. I haven't yet decided whether we're going to talk about Parshat Tzav or we're going to take a digression and talk about Megillat Esther. That will be determined sometime between now and next Monday evening. Have a good week, rest of the week, everyone, and take good care and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Toda.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Hi, Eddie. Thank you.